realized something was wrong when his friends started finishing my sentences for me. Not the sweet kind, the ugly ones. The ones said behind closed doors. The ones I never repeated out loud. It happened in the parking lot behind the grocery store in Tacoma. The kind with flickering lights and shopping carts abandoned like skeletons. Mark's friend Dylan laughed and said I always made things dramatic, that I loved turning nothing into a crisis. And I stood there frozen, because those were the exact words my husband had thrown at me 2 nights before, while I cried into a kitchen towel. I remember thinking maybe I had said it once. Maybe I had vented. Maybe I was losing track of my own mouth. That was the first feeling, confusion mixed with shame, the kind that makes you start apologizing even when no one accused you directly. On the drive home, I kept replaying our last argument in my head, the one about his phone, about why he never left it face down anymore, about how he smiled at messages and then snapped at me for asking who it was. I told myself couples fight, people talk, information travels, but something felt too precise, like my private thoughts had been transcribed. That night, I lay awake, listening to Mark breathe, slow and even, the kind of sleep that comes easily when you feel justified. I stared at the ceiling and wondered when my marriage had become a group discussion I was not invited to. The next time it happened was at a birthday dinner downtown, a loud restaurant with exposed brick, and a long table crowded with his friends and their wives. Someone raised a glass and joked about how patience should be my New Year's resolution, and again the wording cut too close, a phrase Mark had used when I asked him to stop mocking me during arguments. I laughed because everyone was watching, because women learn early how to laugh when the alternative is being called sensitive. Inside I felt hollow, like a room someone had emptied without telling me. On the walk back to the car, I asked him carefully if he talked to people about us, and he shrugged and said, of course, everyone does. It's healthy, and why was I always making things into accusations? His voice had that soft warning in it, the one that said drop this or pay later. I tried to let it go, but once you notice a pattern it follows you everywhere. His brother casually referenced a fight about money. His co-worker teased me about my tone. His cousin asked if I had always been this intense. Each time I nodded and smiled, and felt myself shrinking, like my version of events was being overwritten in real time. What hurt most was not that he talked, it was that I never recognized the story they seemed to know. In their version I was unstable, emotional, unpredictable, a woman who exploded without warning. In my memory I was exhausted, trying to be heard, asking the same questions again and again, because the answers kept changing. I started doubting myself. I replayed arguments and wondered if my voice really sounded like that, if I really said the things they hinted at. Gaslighting is not a single bright moment, it is erosion, and I was losing ground. The truth started to surface on a quiet afternoon when I borrowed his car to drive to the post office. My phone was dead. His was connected to the Bluetooth, and a notification popped up on the dashboard screen. It was a file name, nothing dramatic, just a date and time, followed by the word audio. I told myself it was a podcast, a work thing, anything that did not make my hands shake on the steering wheel. At the red light I tapped the screen, just once, curiosity pretending to be innocence. I heard my own voice. It took a second to recognize it, thin and strained. Asking why he kept lying to me, asking why he always turned things around. Then his voice came in, calm and measured, explaining how unreasonable I was being, how I always twisted his words, how exhausting it was to live like this. The light turned green and horns blared behind me, but I could not move. I listened to myself cry. I listened to him sigh. I listened to a private moment unfold through cheap car speakers in the middle of traffic. I stopped the playback and sat there breathing hard, my chest tight like I had been caught doing something wrong, even though I was listening to my own life. By the time I got home, my shock had turned cold. I did not confront him, not yet. I needed to understand how deep this went, how many moments had been stolen and repackaged without my consent. That night after he fell asleep, I unlocked his phone, my hands steady in a way that surprised me. There was a folder hidden but not locked, filled with recordings labeled by date. Months of them. Arguments about money, about intimacy, about his mother, about the night I begged him to stop yelling because the neighbors could hear. Some files had been sent, I could see the threads, jokes and comments layered over my pain. He had edited some of them, cutting out his raised voice, isolating my reactions, framing me like evidence. I felt something inside me settle, not relief, not rage, but clarity. I was not crazy. I was curated. I went to the bathroom and threw up quietly, then washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked smaller than I remembered, but my eyes were sharp, awake. The next morning I kissed him goodbye like nothing had changed, because everything already had. For weeks I said nothing. I collected screenshots, forwarded files to an email he did not know about, saved dates and names. I listened to recordings with headphones on in empty rooms, hearing myself from the outside, recognizing the pattern of how he pushed until I cracked, and then stepped back to let me burn alone. I started therapy again and told my therapist the truth this time, not the softened version. She did not interrupt, she just nodded. And when I finished, she said quietly that control often hides behind calm voices. Meanwhile, Mark grew more confident, lighter, as if some invisible burden had been lifted now that his version of me was circulating freely. He joked more at my expense in public, knowing the room was already primed. The invitation for his parents' anniversary dinner arrived in early spring, a formal thing at their house outside Olympia, the kind of event where everyone pretends not to notice the cracks. I almost declined, but then I realized something important. He had always controlled the narrative because he controlled the audience. That night, for the first time, the audience would be mine too. I spent the week before the dinner backing everything up twice, then a third time. I chose one recording carefully, not the worst one, just the clearest, the one where his mask slipped without theatrics, where his contempt was quiet and unmistakable. The evening of the dinner I wore a simple dress and tied my hair back, my hands steady again. At the table his mother talked about memories, his father poured wine, his brother laughed too loudly. Mark squeezed my knee under the table in what looked like affection and felt like a warning. When dessert was cleared and conversation softened, I stood up and said I wanted to share something, my voice calm, almost gentle. Mark looked confused, then annoyed, then alert. I connected my phone to the speaker on the sideboard, the one usually reserved for background music. I met his eyes once, just once, and pressed play. My voice filled the room, raw and unpolished, asking to be treated with respect. Then his voice followed, slow and cold, explaining exactly what he thought of me when he believed no one else was listening. No one moved. No one spoke. The room held its breath as the truth finally had a sound. The recording ended, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything he had ever said to me. That was when Mark finally stood up, his face pale, his mouth opening as if to explain, to reframe, to regain control. And I realized something else. This was not the end of the story. It was the moment it could no longer be told without me. For a few seconds after the recording stopped, no one reacted. Not even Mark, who stood frozen with his hands on the back of the chair like it was the only solid thing left in the room. His mother was the first to breathe out, a shallow sound that broke the tension but did not ease it. His father stared at the tablecloth, as if it had suddenly become very interesting. His brother shifted in his seat and avoided looking at either of us. I stayed standing because sitting felt like surrender, and I had surrendered enough. Mark finally spoke, laughing too quickly, saying this was taken out of context, that everyone argued, that I was always dramatic, that I had invaded his privacy. The words came out in the exact order I had heard so many times before, and hearing them in front of witnesses made something almost click into place. I did not argue with him. I did not explain. I just asked if anyone in the room had ever heard him talk to me like that before tonight. No one answered. That silence was different from the one after the recording. This one was full of realization, the kind that makes people uncomfortable because it asks them to reframe memories they were comfortable with. His mother finally said my name, softly, like she was afraid it might break. She asked if that was really how things were at home. I nodded once. I did not add details. I did not cry, I just nodded. Mark snapped then, his calm cracking into something sharp, accusing me of humiliating him, of staging this, of being manipulative. I watched his father flinch at the tone, watched his brother's face tighten, and I knew they were hearing it too now, not as a concept, not as a joke, but as a pattern. I picked up my phone and disconnected it from the speaker, my movements deliberate. I said I was going to stay somewhere else for a while, that I had already packed, and that I hoped everyone enjoyed the rest of the evening. No one stopped me. The drive away from the house felt unreal, the road dark and empty, my hands light on the steering wheel like I was floating instead of driving. I expected to feel triumphant or devastated or terrified, but what I felt was quiet. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Messages from Mark came in fast, shifting tones with each one. First anger, then disbelief, then apology, then blame again. I did not respond. For the first time in a long time, his words had nowhere to land. I stayed with a friend named Lila, someone I had not been close to lately, because Mark always said she fed my paranoia. She did not ask questions that night. She handed me tea, showed me the spare room, and told me I was safe there. The next morning the story had already started to unravel. His brother texted me awkwardly, saying he had no idea things were that bad, that Mark had always framed our fights as mutual blow-ups. His mother left a voicemail saying she needed time to process, but that she believed me. Mark showed up at the house in the afternoon, his face drawn, his voice suddenly soft. He said he never meant for it to go that far, that he recorded arguments to protect himself, that I could be cruel too. He said sorry in a way that sounded practiced. I listened without interrupting, noticing how he never once addressed the sharing, the editing, the humiliation. When he finished, I told him I was done, not angrily, not tearfully, just done. He stared at me like I had spoken a language he did not know. The separation was not dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no slammed doors. There were logistics, lawyers, quiet evenings signing papers. He tried once more to reframe the narrative with friends, but now people asked questions. Now the story had cracks. I moved into a small apartment near the water in Seattle, a place with big windows and no history. At night, I listened to the sounds of the city and learned how silence could feel spacious instead of threatening. Sometimes I replayed the recordings not to punish myself but to remember. To remember how easy it had been to doubt my own reality when someone else controlled the playback. I did not tell everyone what happened. I did not need to. The truth no longer felt fragile. Months later, I ran into Dylan, the friend from the grocery store parking lot. He looked uncomfortable, apologized without specifics, said Mark had always had a way of making things sound reasonable. I thanked him and walked away, lighter than I expected. What stayed with me was not the betrayal itself, but the moment it ended, the sound of my own voice, filling a room that could no longer pretend it did not hear me. I learned that night that privacy can be violated quietly, and so can dignity. But there is a different kind of power in letting the truth speak exactly as it is, without explanation, without defense. I still flinch sometimes when I argue with someone, still wonder how I sound from the outside. Then I remind myself that my voice belongs to me again, unrecorded, unedited, finally whole.